The Shadow Collectors Club. The invitation. The first time Emma heard about the Shadow Collectors Club, it was through a nondescript letter delivered to her office. The envelope was plain, the kind you'd buy in bulk at any convenience store, with only her name handwritten on the front. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, crisp and white. Its message was brief. Your shadow is extraordinary. Come see its value. Thursday, 9 p.m., Lindenwood Manor. Emma frowned as she reread the note. There was no sender, no contact information, just those cryptic words. At first, she considered tossing it in the trash, but the address at the bottom stopped her. Lindenwood Manor wasn't far from where she lived. The once grand mansion had stood abandoned for years, its windows broken and its gates rusted over. Curiosity gnawed at her. What could this be? A prank? Some kind of underground art project? Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. She resolved to ignore it, yet as the days passed, the letter's strange promise lingered in her mind. What did they mean by, "Your shadow is extraordinary"? How could anyone even know such a thing? By Thursday evening, her resolve had weakened. The gathering. The rain came down in cold sheets as Emma stepped through the wrought iron gates of Lindenwood Manor. She clutched her umbrella tighter, its flimsy frame no match for the wind. The mansion loomed before her, its dark silhouette framed by lightning in the distance. At the door, a man in a formal black suit greeted her. He was pale and thin, with hollow cheeks and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the dim light around him. "Name?" he asked. "Emma Hart," she replied hesitantly. He nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Inside, the grand foyer was surprisingly intact, its marble floors polished to a mirror-like sheen. Candles lined the walls, their flickering flames casting long shadows across the room. A dozen other guests milled about, each dressed in their finest attire. Emma suddenly felt underdressed in her rain-soaked coat and sneakers. A woman in a sequined gown noticed her and smiled. "First time?" the woman asked, her voice warm but tinged with something Emma couldn't place. "Pity, perhaps?" "Yes," Emma admitted. "What is this place?" "You'll see soon enough," the woman replied cryptically, taking a sip from the champagne flute in her hand. Before Emma could press for details, a bell rang out, silencing the room. A man in a velvet suit appeared at the top of the grand staircase. His presence was magnetic, his smile sharp and wolfish. "Welcome, honored guests," he began, his voice smooth as honey. "Tonight, we gather to appreciate the rarest treasures of all, your shadows." Shadows on display. The guests were led into a dimly lit chamber at the back of the mansion. The room was cavernous, its high ceilings lost in darkness. Along the walls were glass cases, each illuminated by a single overhead light. Inside each case was a shadow, frozen mid-movement. Emma stopped in front of one and stared in disbelief. The shadow was humanoid, but its head was distorted, stretching upward like smoke rising from a fire. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. She turned to see the man in the velvet suit watching her closely. What are these?" Emma asked. "Shadows, of course," he said with a smile. "Each one unique, each one priceless. And tonight, one of yours will join them." "What do you mean?" Emma's voice trembled. The man stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "We all cast shadows, Ms. Hart, but some shadows are more valuable than others. Yours, for example, is exceptionally rare." "I don't understand," she said, taking a step back. "You will," he replied, "when the bidding begins." The auction Emma was led to a raised platform in the center of the room. She wasn't the only one. 6 other guests stood alongside her, each looking just as confused and frightened. The velvet-suited man clapped his hands, and a strange humming sound filled the air. The shadows of the 7 participants began to stretch and writhe, moving independently of their owners. Emma gasped as her shadow peeled itself from the floor and floated upward. It hovered in the air, twisting and contorting into shapes she didn't recognize. "Behold," the man announced, "the finest selection of shadows we've ever had the privilege to offer." The crowd erupted into applause, their faces alight with a hunger that made Emma's stomach churn. "Let the bidding begin." The price of freedom. The auction was a blur of numbers and shouted bids. Emma's shadow was one of the most sought after, its fluid movements captivating the room. 50,000, someone shouted. 80, 100,000. Emma's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. When the final bid was called, her shadow was sold for a staggering $200,000. The man in the velvet suit turned to her with a sly grin. "Congratulations, Ms. Hart. You've made history tonight." "But what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He gestured toward the exit. "You're free to go. Your shadow, however, will remain here, as per the terms of our arrangement." "I never agreed to this." "Didn't you?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "You came here of your own accord, didn't you? That was all we needed." Life without a shadow. In the weeks that followed, Emma tried to return to her normal life, but nothing felt right. Without her shadow, she felt incomplete, as if a part of her soul had been stolen. People began to notice too. Strangers stared at her on the street, their eyes filled with unease. One night, she caught her reflection in a shop window and froze. Her body was there, but her reflection was wrong. It was darker, sharper, and its movements didn't quite match her own. Epilogue: The collector returns. Months later, another letter arrived. This one was shorter than the first. "We hope you're enjoying your new life. Should you wish to reclaim what's yours, you know where to find us." Emma crumpled the note in her fist. She knew she couldn't go back, at least not without risking more than just her shadow. But as the days stretched into nights and her shadowless form grew ever more alien to the world around her, the temptation became harder to resist. Would she dare to return to the Shadow Collectors Club? Let me know if you'd like to expand or adjust any part of the story.